The wagon wheels had stopped turning 3 days ago, but Sarah's hands still trembled as if she could feel every rut and stone from the endless journey west. She pressed her palm against the rough bark of the cottonwood tree, watching the Apache camp below through gaps in the yellow leaves. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children's laughter echoed off canyon walls, and somewhere among those earth-toned dwellings lived the man who had found her collapsed beside a dried creek bed, more dead than alive. Her fingers traced the faded bruise on her wrist where Thomas had grabbed her that final morning, his voice cutting through the Kansas dawn like winter wind. "Barren ground don't deserve good seed, Sarah. Pack what you can carry." The 23 years of marriage reduced to a canvas satchel and the clothes on her back, all because her womb had remained empty despite countless prayers and remedies. The shame had followed her across 3 territories, but here, watching Apache women tend their fires with the same careful attention she once gave her garden, something different stirred in her chest. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling that pull of curiosity, don't let it slip away. Hit that subscribe button right now, tell us in the comments which corner of the world you're joining us from, and smash that hype button, because this tale of unexpected belonging is just beginning to reveal its secrets. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when 2 broken souls discover that family isn't always born from blood. The Apache chief emerged from the largest dwelling, his movements deliberate, despite the grief that seemed to weigh down his shoulders like an invisible burden. Ayana had told her his name was Nalnish, which meant "he works," though the old woman's English came in careful, measured pieces. Sarah had learned more from watching him these past weeks, how he paused at the entrance to what must have been his wife's workspace, how his hand lingered on a child's forgotten toy, how he stood at the eastern edge of camp each dawn, facing the direction where Apache tradition said spirits traveled. She descended the slope carefully, her worn boots finding purchase on loose shale. The children noticed her first, as they always did, their dark eyes following her movements with curiosity rather than fear. One little girl, perhaps 6 years old, had taken to leaving small stones arranged in patterns near Sarah's sleeping place. Gifts or messages, she couldn't tell, but the gesture warmed something inside her that had been cold for longer than she cared to remember. Nalnish looked up as she approached the central fire. His face carried the weathered strength of a man who had seen 40 winters, maybe more, but his eyes held a depth of loss that made her own grief feel less solitary. When he spoke, his English came slowly, each word chosen with the same care he used when crafting arrow points. "The women say you know plants, medicine plants." Sarah nodded, though her throat felt tight. Back in Kansas, she had been known for her healing garden, her ability to coax life from stubborn soil and brew remedies that eased pain. Thomas had tolerated it until the neighbors began asking why a woman so gifted with growing things couldn't grow a child of her own. The irony had become a poison between them, turning her greatest skill into evidence of her greatest failure. "I know some things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nalnish gestured toward a young woman sitting apart from the others, her face pale with exhaustion, one hand pressed protectively over her swollen belly. "Desba, the baby comes soon, but something is wrong. Our medicine woman died in the winter sickness. We have no one." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had attended births before, had held other women's babies while her own arms remained empty, had smiled through the pain of watching life emerge from bodies that worked as hers never would. But here, in this place where she was neither wife nor mother, nor anything but a stranger who had stumbled into their world half dead, they were asking her to be what she had always been denied the chance to become. "I don't know Apache ways," she said, though her feet were already moving toward the young woman. "Life is life," Nalnish replied, and something in his tone made her look back at him. "Pain is pain. Help is help." Desba's eyes widened as Sarah knelt beside her, but when Sarah placed gentle hands on the taut curve of her belly, feeling the baby's position through layers of skin and muscle, the young woman relaxed slightly. The baby was breech. Sarah could tell from the way the small body pressed against her palms, head up instead of down, fighting against the natural order of birth. "We need to turn the baby," Sarah said, looking up at Nalnish. "It's not in the right position." The next hours blurred together in a rhythm as old as humanity itself. Sarah's hands remembered skills she had learned from her own mother, techniques passed down through generations of women who understood that birth was both miracle and battle. She massaged Desba's belly with gentle pressure, encouraging the baby to shift, while other Apache women brought warm cloths and bitter tea that eased the young mother's pain. Nalnish remained nearby, not intruding but present, his quiet strength anchoring the small group as they worked. Sarah found herself stealing glances at him, noting how he anticipated needs before they were spoken, how he moved through the space with the unconscious grace of someone completely at home in his own skin. When Desba cried out during a particularly strong contraction, his jaw tightened as if he felt the pain himself. "Your wife," Sarah said during a quiet moment, not sure why she needed to know, but unable to stop herself from asking. Was it like this?" Nalnish's hands stilled on the water bowl he was holding. Ayana was small, the baby was large, both fought hard, but... He set the bowl down carefully as if it might shatter. "I could not help them, I could only watch." The simple words carried a weight of grief that made Sarah's chest ache. She understood now why he had asked her to help Desba, why his eyes held such desperate hope mixed with fear. This wasn't just about saving one woman and her child, it was about proving that sometimes, despite all evidence to the contrary, life could win. The baby turned just as the sun reached its highest point, a sudden shift that made Desba gasp with relief. Sarah felt the small head settle into the proper position, and tears she didn't expect began streaming down her face. After that, the birth progressed quickly, Desba's body finally able to work with nature instead of against it. When the baby emerged, a perfect squalling boy, with his mother's delicate features and his father's strong lungs, Sarah found herself holding new life for the first time in her 41 years. The infant's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb with surprising strength, and something inside her chest cracked open like an egg, releasing emotions she had buried so deep she had forgotten they existed. "He's beautiful," she whispered, placing the baby on Desba's chest and watching the young woman's face transform with joy and exhaustion and fierce maternal love. Nalnish stepped closer, his eyes moving from the baby to Sarah's tear-streaked face. "You have given us a great gift," he said quietly. "What can we give you in return?" Sarah looked around at the circle of Apache women who had worked beside her, at Desba cradling her son, at the children who had crept closer to see the new baby. For the first time since leaving Kansas, she felt useful, needed, valued for something other than her ability to produce children of her own. "A place," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Just a place to belong." Something shifted in Nalnish's expression, a softening around his eyes that made her heart skip. "You already have that," he said. "You have had it since the day you helped my people. The question is whether you will stay to claim it." The weeks that followed took on a rhythm Sarah had never experienced. She learned to weave baskets from willow branches, to prepare traditional foods, to speak basic Apache phrases that made the children giggle when she mispronounced them. Her hands, which had been idle for so long, found new purpose in tending the sick, helping with births, teaching other women the plant remedies she knew. Nalnish began seeking her out in the evenings, their conversation starting with practical matters, which herbs grew best in desert soil, how to preserve meat for winter travel, but gradually deepening into something more personal. He told her about his childhood, about learning to lead his people through years of conflict and displacement. She shared stories of her life in Kansas, carefully editing out the worst of Thomas's cruelty, but letting him see glimpses of the loneliness that had nearly consumed her. One evening, as they sat beside the dying embers of the central fire, Nalnish asked the question she had been dreading. "Why did your husband send you away?" Sarah's hands twisted in her lap, the shame rising in her throat like bile. "I couldn't give him children. In his eyes, that made me worthless." Nalnish was quiet for so long that she began to think he regretted asking. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that made her look up at him. "My people believe that some women are chosen to be mothers to all children, not just their own. We call them grandmother spirits, women who nurture and heal and teach, who help bring life into the world even when they cannot create it themselves." He paused, his dark eyes reflecting the last flames of the fire. "Perhaps your husband could not see what was right in front of him." The words hit her like a revelation, reframing everything she had believed about herself, about her worth, about the cruel hand fate had dealt her. She had spent so many years seeing her childlessness as a failure that she had never considered it might be a different kind of calling. "Is that what you see when you look at me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Nalnish reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and touched her hand with his fingertips. "I see a woman who brings life wherever she goes. I see someone who understands loss but chooses to heal instead of harm. I see—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet conviction. "I see someone I would be honored to walk beside for whatever years remain to us." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected to love again, had convinced herself that part of her heart had died somewhere on the prairie between Kansas and this canyon. But sitting here beside this man who saw strength where others had seen failure, who valued her skills and her spirit rather than her ability to bear children, she felt something she had thought was lost forever beginning to bloom. "I don't know how to be an Apache wife," she said, though her hand had turned palm up beneath his, their fingers beginning to intertwine. "I don't know how to be a husband again," Nalnish replied. "Perhaps we can learn together." The winter that followed was the harshest anyone could remember, but Sarah barely noticed the cold. She had found her place in the intricate web of Apache family life, not as an outsider trying to fit in, but as someone whose unique gifts were essential to the community's survival. When children fell ill, they came to her. When women faced difficult births, she was there. When the elders needed someone to listen to their stories and remember their wisdom, she sat at their feet and absorbed every word. Nalnish courted her with the patient attention of a man who understood that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt slowly. He brought her small gifts, a perfectly shaped stone, a feather from a rare bird, wildflowers that bloomed in hidden places. He taught her to ride Apache style, to read the subtle signs that warned of weather changes, to move through the desert as if she belonged there. Their wedding, when it finally came in the spring, was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. No church, no white dress, no vows spoken before a stern-faced preacher. Instead, they stood together at sunrise, facing east as Apache tradition demanded, while the entire community gathered around them. Ayana, the old woman who had first taught Sarah Apache words, spoke the blessing in a voice that carried the weight of generations. As Nalnish placed a necklace of turquoise and silver around Sarah's neck, stones that had belonged to his first wife, offered now as a symbol of continuity rather than replacement, she felt the last of her old life fall away, like a shed skin. She was no longer the barren woman who had been cast out in shame. She was Sarah who brings life, Sarah who heals, Sarah who found her true family in the most unexpected place. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Government agents came, trying to force the Apache onto reservations. Drought tested their ability to find water and game. Illness swept through the camp, taking some of the elders Sarah had grown to love. But through it all, she and Nalnish faced each crisis together, their partnership deepening with every shared burden. Sarah delivered dozens of babies, each one a small miracle that filled the empty spaces in her heart. She adopted orphaned children, taught young women the healing arts, became the grandmother spirit Nalnish had recognized in her from the beginning. Her hair turned silver. Her hands grew weathered from years of desert sun, but her eyes held a contentment that had been missing for most of her life. One evening, as she sat with Nalnish, watching their adopted daughter play with the other children, she thought about the woman she had been when she first stumbled into this canyon, broken, ashamed, convinced that her life was over at 41. That woman could never have imagined this, a love built on mutual respect rather than duty, a family chosen rather than born, a purpose that had nothing to do with the children she couldn't have and everything to do with the lives she could touch. "Do you ever regret it?" Nalnish asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Leaving your old world behind?" Sarah considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked something important. She thought about Kansas, about the farmhouse where she had spent so many lonely years, about Thomas and the life that had felt like a slow suffocation. "I didn't leave it behind," she said finally. "I was thrown away like something broken. But sometimes, when something breaks in just the right way, it can be put back together into something stronger and more beautiful than it ever was before." Nalnish smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something almost boyish. "The Apache have a saying, 'What the earth rejects, the sky embraces.' Perhaps you were never meant for that small life in Kansas. Perhaps you were always meant for this." As the stars emerged overhead, painting the desert sky with ancient light, Sarah felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. She had spent so many years believing that her inability to bear children made her incomplete, defective, less than other women. But here, surrounded by the laughter of children who called her grandmother, the respect of women who sought her wisdom, the love of a man who valued her for exactly who she was, she understood that she had never been broken at all. She had simply been planted in the wrong soil, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up toward the infinite darkness, and Sarah reached for Nalnish's hand with the same trust she had learned to place in the desert's harsh beauty, in the Apache way of seeing strength in adaptation, in the radical possibility that sometimes the life you're meant to live is nothing like the one you planned. Maybe you're sitting there right now, feeling like something in your own life doesn't fit the mold others expect, wondering if there's a place where your particular gifts would be valued instead of dismissed. And maybe this story is reminding you that the most beautiful chapters often begin when we stop trying to force ourselves into spaces too small for our spirits, and start trusting that somewhere, somehow, there's a place where we belong exactly as we are.